Hey everyone, and welcome to the Innovation Jam plus Social Good. I'm Corinne Gray. I work as an Innovation Engagement Officer at UNHCR Innovation, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Hangout is really the first of two live Hangouts in the lead up to the Humanitarian Innovation Jam 2015, which will be held at Georgetown University between January 14th and 16th. So if you haven't already heard about it, the Humanitarian Innovation Jam is an event that UNHCR had last year in partnership with Georgetown University. And the Jam is really a meeting of the minds for all those who are working in or who may be passionate about the intersection of innovation and humanitarian development. And last year's event was a huge success, so we're going to have it again this next year, and we're going to team up with Georgetown University, and we're very excited to have Plus Social Good and the UN Foundation as new partners. This year, we're going to convene actors in the humanitarian innovation and humanitarian innovation space, including students, scholars, practitioners, but this time we're going to take a special focus on innovation management. And what we want to look at are the key challenges that we have to overcome as a sector to really create what we like to think of as a healthy ecosystem for innovation management. And this theme is really important. For me, innovation is not really new to the humanitarian sector per se. There's been a lot of recent talk about innovation, but just as an activity and an approach toward problem solving, it isn't really entirely new for humanitarians. Over the years in our field, we found ourselves in challenging situations, and we've been forced to problem solve in creative ways. But that said, there is a lack of strong practice and policy for innovation management in the humanitarian sector. And this can be characterized by a lack of tools, a lack of resources, and a lack of organizational frameworks. And there are so many humanitarian workers in the field right now that are innovating on a regular basis. But what we need now is for organizational frameworks and ecosystems to help them thrive. So today we're hanging out with Jay Corliss, who's the Director of Innovation at the UN Foundation. We have Ruben Cantu. He's the founder and CEO of Core Media Strategies. And we also have Jesse Granger, who's the Director of Strategy and Partnership at Agoura Partnerships. So Jay, Jesse, Ruben, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are really, really delighted to have you with us. But just a few housekeeping things before we launch into discussion. I just want to remind everyone who's watching us that you can actually ask questions on Twitter at UNHCR Innovation or at Plus Social Good. And the hashtag for this conversation is hashtag HIJ2015 Humanitarian Innovation Jam. And there's also an answer tool, and we will be sure to put your question in the queue for our speakers to answer. So once again, thanks to Jay, Jesse, and Ruben. So, I mean, given your experience and your line of work, and I think among us all, we sort of represent a broad cross-section of sectors, I want to just start off by asking each of you, how do you define innovation? Jay, why don't we start with you? And Jay, you can probably give us more in terms of the context of humanitarian work.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. Well, I mean, what we do with the foundation is we support the United Nations and its innovation work. So that's really, right now, we spread across 9 agencies, and we split it between 2 sectors of work. There's the humanitarian, which comes in post-conflict, post-disaster, and that's really people in need. It can you've seen the images on television. It's what happens after an earthquake, or it can be after war, and rebuilding societies. So we work with 5 agencies. That's UNHCR, UNICEF, UNDP, WFP, and OCHA, and all of those agencies work in the humanitarian space, and that's really just delivering basic needs immediately. So when we talk about innovation in that space, I think the Deputy High Commissioner of UNHCR said it best and most succinctly. He calls it doing new things with friends. As Corin said, this has been ongoing work for almost 70 years. So we're always looking to do new things and to do what we do better. So in a way, that's what innovation is to us. It's just doing new things, doing the same thing but in new ways with friends. So I'll put that out there and let the others respond, see how they feel about that.
How about you, Jesse?
Yes, so at Agora, we work with early stage companies across Latin America, and this year we'll be going into the Caribbean. So these are kind of early stage companies, revenues somewhere between $50,000 and $2 million that are really ready for scale and ready to grow. They're private companies that we're working with, and the goal of the work that we do is to bring them through an accelerator, which gets them prepared for growth, and then more specifically, gives them the tools they need to scale the work that they're doing and ultimately the impact that they're creating. We scale that in a few ways. Sometimes it's through financial capital. We have closed 18.2 million in capital. And another way is through market access, getting our companies access to the markets they need to grow. More specifically, we're working with companies that are solving social, economic, or environmental problems through a for-profit lens. So for us, innovation is really looking for kind of those early stage for-profit companies that are solving key issues. We kind of take our accelerator and try to use the accelerator as a way to target certain issues. So for example, in 2015, we'll be using the accelerator to target access to basic services. So we're accelerating kind of a group of companies in collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank who are solving access to water issues, access to education issues, access to health and sanitation, and access to water issues. So really innovation for us is using the private sector as a way to kind of tackle many of these issues around international development and poverty.
Great, thanks. And how about you, Ruben?
So our company here in Austin really leans to be a collaborative and community, consider a petri dish. We're positioning Austin to really be a hub and a center for that international and local interaction, so that innovation truly can happen and we can learn from different ways. Our company, Core Media Strategies, focuses on working with startups and brands who are doing socially conscious efforts and amplifying their message. What we have been doing with the Plus Social Good Network over the past couple of years, specifically with South by Southwest, is putting on a yearly conference that helps spotlight those entrepreneurs and innovators who are taking risk and learning from each other, so that way we can iterate faster and get to solutions much quicker. To me, I think the definition of innovation, if I may, just to simplify it so that everyone can kind of understand it, and the way I've been able to apply it is when knowledge meets new application. So when new knowledge meets new application, you get innovation. And so when you create a system and you allow for that feedback loop to be integrated, then all of a sudden you're able to learn from that. And I think that's where new innovation really kind of takes hold and takes strength and is able to really impact people. And so we've been trying to do that, working here with the community, building alliances. This past month, we launched our graduated program. We're calling it Mobility Week, and that graduated from our very first campaign that we launched here as an organization here in Austin, called Work From Home Day. So Mobility Week basically has launched this effort to try to get all the community, from government to private industry to nonprofit to education, to all work together, figure out how we can address one of the biggest issues that we face here in Austin, which is clean air and the immense growth that we're having. So which results in a lot of traffic. And so we actually created a campaign to start figuring out ways that we can all work together and be innovative in the way we get around in the city so that we can reduce our impact on the community. So those are a couple of ways that we see that maybe from a local level, which may not have immediate global impact, we can still be part of the solution.
Thanks, Ruben. I really do like your definition, when new knowledge meets new application, But Jay, I want to turn it over to you. And I know Ruben and Jesse, you're working really more with private companies, but I think in the humanitarian field, we really do recognize that we can learn a lot from the private sector. But Jay, I want to ask you, what do you think are the major difficulties when trying to institutionalize innovation in a humanitarian organization? And how do you think it might be different than managing other aspects of a humanitarian organization?
Wow. Well, you know, as I mentioned in my kind of opening remarks, we're working in an area that's existed for almost 70 years now, and we're say entrenched organization, and that's one first big obstacle is that we're a 70-year-old organization. We're also multi-governmental, multilateral, so we work with anywhere from 170 to 195 countries and their governments, and an unlimited number of NGOs that help us implement. So whenever we try to innovate, we have to work within these organizations, these pre-existing organizations. So that has its own challenges, you know, and doing work within these organizations is something that's already challenging enough, but to do new things has its own bit of coalition building, I would say. So the way it's different is that what we've seen now, just as we've seen in the private sector, within the public sector, we have to do things new and different, and we have to do it with lots of people that you know really want to work with us, but don't know how. So what's happened within the UN system is there's been a number of innovation units created. And those innovation units have had very high-level support, and they're given the opportunity to take some risk. Take calculated risk, of course, but risk nonetheless. So that goes in first part, they're given an innovation unit, and then what happens after that is these groups of people have to start building internal coalitions. They normally reach out to a network of friends, and they work to build in and get buy-in internally. So once they get the buy-in internally, they start moving forward. But that buy-in really, in essence, is lots of explaining. You're trying to convince people that they've done it, and it works. So you've got to change. You've got to change habits. So one, it's lots of explaining, and two, because it's new and different, you have to send a reassuring message. You know, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Let's just move forward. And number three is pace. Innovation, you know, is the big famous thing is fail and fail fast. Well, within the system, we have to fail small and slowly, just to buy that, because we're also building confidence in what we do. So we can't afford really large failures. So we have to actually mitigate our failures, and we keep them small and incremental failures. I know that's not necessarily innovation as the private sector would look at it, but that's the force of our machine that we're working with, it's incremental failure. And then the last challenge I would say that's a little bit different than just regular programmatic work is that we have to develop ownership. And you know, you hear this all the time about stakeholder ownership, but it's not just the beneficiary or the user, it's also the people that are executing the plan. You really have to feel that they own it. So it's a lot of co-creation that we're in. We have to sit down, we have to develop common ownership, we have to create together, because for the most part our colleagues have great ideas. So as innovations unit, what we do is we support them in executing their ideas, but they've got to trust us. So those are kind of the 4 steps that I would look at, and you know, the old versus new.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, Jesse, I kind of want to turn it over to you. I think Jay touched on some really important points, one of which is that particularly now what we're seeing in humanitarian organizations is that there is sort of a separate innovation unit, and there it does sort of give the impression almost as if innovation is something very siloed happening in one corner of the organization, whereas I imagine in the private sector it is something that you just sort of maybe try to embed perhaps within the entire company, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But even if that's not the case, I mean, you're working with people in areas where perhaps they might have limited availability to resources. So how do you really sort of support and foster innovation in an area with limited availability to resources? Because I think even for us, at UNHCR we have an innovation unit, and right now it sits in headquarters, but UNHCR is around the world, it's in the field, and we have colleagues who don't have the same kind of resources because they may be in far off remote areas. So in your experience, what are some good practices in fostering innovation in areas where there's not as much access to resources?
So what we've seen is that the problems that our entrepreneurs are solving that are in our network are being forced to innovate themselves. It's just something that is a part of what they have to do in order to solve these problems in kind of interesting ways. To not only meet a need, but then find a way somehow to build a profit into that, which is about 5 levels of complexity that calls the entrepreneurs themselves to be innovative. What we try to do is respond to the needs of those entrepreneurs through our accelerator process. So our accelerator is 13 weeks, 130 hours of consulting, and kind of have these 3 key deliverables, which are your investment teaser, your investment memo, and then your full financials to get you ready for investment and ready for scale. That came from after about 7 years entrepreneurs are innovatively solving these problems. And then through our accelerator, we then respond to that by embedding their needs and responding to those needs in the accelerator process. So I think for us, it's really easy because we're constantly working with these kind of small innovation labs called companies that are solving problems across Latin America and the Caribbean. And then our response to that kind of keeps us on our toes. And then with different countries and different contexts, we have to respond different ways, and that kind of keeps the organization, even though we're almost 10 years old, feeling a bit like a startup at times, because we're constantly responding to new government regulations, constantly responding to different kind of macro and microeconomic issues that are affecting the different countries we're working in, or constantly responding to, okay, well, this issue seems to be solved, now we have to go on to this issue, or this is another issue. For example, now we're beginning to work more with indigenous peoples. As indigenous groups are becoming more and more empowered, you're getting more and more entrepreneurs. So for example, how do you grow an indigenous entrepreneur while at the same time through an accelerator, which is a very kind of individualist, Western-focused way of growing a business and often very hierarchical. Sometimes that's at odds with a lot of the ways indigenous communities are structured. So how do we mix those together? So it's just our everyday response to issues on the ground that make us innovative as a company, or at least have that culture of innovation that kind of goes from CEO all the way down to the fellows who work on the ground.
Thanks, Jesse. Ruben, I'm glad to see you back because I wanted to ask you just about platforms, and I'm asking that question just because, for humanitarian organizations specifically, we're looking at very huge organizations with so many different offices and bureaux across the world. And, the ideas behind technology and platforms, because we really may not have always the resources to give maybe more hands-on attention that an entrepreneur might need within an organization. So can you speak a little bit about how we can build platforms to really support innovation management within an organization?
Thank you. I'll use the case example of what we're testing out in the recent year and a half now. The Plus Social Good Network has really started lending itself to allow a community to start taking shape and form and talking about these issues. We'll see how that ends up evolving within the next year or so. We have a cross-section of people who, in different industries and passions, who are all interested in being part of change and solving some of the world's toughest problems. I think one of the first steps in order to make this platform successful, and I don't just mean Plus Social Good, but any platform, is finding ways that people can find common interest and iterate on that particular issue. So if we look at from this model, we need nodes and we need large clusters, and these nodes and clusters need to interact. And so, for example, if you go to a conference, breakout rooms really end up, and focus groups really end up being beneficial, because people can address particular issues and pain points and come up with small solutions that could work, and then bring that to the larger group and figure out if that's something that can be implemented by the larger cohort, larger attendees at a conference. And so we're seeing this model happen in a virtual space. And so if for innovation management, what I would suggest we do in any humanitarian effort is first address the particular issue that we're trying to solve, but then figure out, what does the stakeholder map look like? What does the cluster look like that's involved and adjacent to the industries, so that we can figure out, hey, maybe there's a different node right to the around the corner from us who's trying to solve some of the same issues that we're trying to address. What are they doing? Have they been successful? What has not worked? Why did it not work? How can we do it better? Could we collaborate with them? Could we adopt some of their practices, so that way we can start iterating faster? See what happens, like even in Austin, we're a very tight-knit community, but industries are not talking to each other. The education people don't talk to the transportation people, don't talk to the energy people, but they're all intertwined and interconnected with each other. And so as an organization like Austin plus Social Good, what we're trying to do is create that platform so that people can talk and learn from each other. And people are like, well, why do I need to know people in the transportation space? Well, that's because we can figure out ways that we can learn from each other, and find new insights that we would have never been exposed to. So as far as creating a platform for innovation management, I think we need to create an infrastructure that allows those conversations that would normally not happen across silos to come together and create convergence.
Thanks, Ruben. I just want to ask a little follow-up to that, because you mentioned something very interesting about sort of having nodes and smaller groups, but then you also talked about different sectors not talking to each other. So what do you sort of recommend in terms of nodes and groups on a platform? Do you recommend people sort of join a group by sector or perhaps by function?
I think that as people join, they should identify their skill sets of what they're good at and what their previous experience is, and then be able to connect with people with like-minded efforts. But at the same time, take a step further and say, what are the things that I'm interested on? What are the things that I would like to be exposed to, and start creating communities around other topics that they're not comfortable with, so that way they start breaking barriers and coming into spaces that they normally wouldn't be exposed to, but they're open with welcome arms because they know, people are here to help. And so everyone.
I think we may have lost Ruben.
Well, I might jump in.
Oh, he's back. Well, Jay, I know you also have a lot of experience with the technological infrastructure side, so why don't you jump in with your thoughts here as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is very cool to be a part of this, because a few more things just popped in my head listening to Ruben. I think what we're working towards in the kind of humanitarian development innovation space is developing a common terminology. It's very interesting that, what Ruben just described as a stakeholder map. That's exactly what we're doing right now. We're trying to develop a stakeholder map, but we call that an ecosystem. And what we're looking at in terms of an ecosystem are the different funders, the roles and responsibilities of each of the different people within this ecosystem. So we have really big public donors at one end, but their money is tied to a certain endeavor. We have small financing people at another. So we really need to understand either that stakeholder map or that ecosystem. But terminology is very important, because that kind of underscores the second type of people that we're really looking for, and I think we're part of that group, are connectors. People that speak the language of the private sector, but also speak the language of the public sector and speak the language of the UN system. And those connectors are people that feel comfortable sitting in those different spaces, but they also have the translation and interpretation skills. They're not afraid of a new word, but they can come pretty quickly and say, oh, I think I know what he means. Because we are looking, fundamentally, we are looking for the same type of thing. We are looking for, similar skill sets, connecting like-minded people, gaining exposure. But I think at a certain meta level, we're within the UN system and within the work we're doing in the development humanitarian space, we haven't yet come to a core set of terms and a structure when we're talking about it. And that's where we're at right now, and that's why these discussions are really important for us, so we can understand how social entrepreneurs address issue, we can understand how tech developers and tech industry address certain issues. We're all talking about the same thing, but it helps us identify a common framework, a common terminology to use.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to kind of build upon what Ruben was saying as well. We've been pretty sector agnostic up until this year. We mean that by we've kind of worked.
Jesse, are you still with us?
And that's kind of what we focus on. We're organizing our accelerator together, and we also have a program on women's economic empowerment. So those individuals will be working together. We're also working with the United Nations Foundation around access to clean cook stoves. So those entrepreneurs will be working together. So we do have a platform at our retreat and at our investor conference where these groups will kind of work, you know, across their boundaries, but at the same time, we're increasingly organizing them around kind of the problems that they're trying to solve individually. So they can kind of rise up as a group and then also begin to work with other people who are also in our accelerator.
I'd like to add something to the conversation really quick.
Sure.
I love what these two gentlemen's points were, and I think in order to ensure success in innovation management, we have to really consider the term and the keyword of resources and resourcefulness. So many times we're stretched out across the world, from first world to third world countries. We're trying to learn how they interact or how they fit in together and how they can come up with solutions. What I've seen some of the best innovations come from is from the global south and the third world, because what happens is they take advantage of the resources that they do have and they become much more creative. And I think that's really where the innovation comes from, that creativity where they push themselves saying, you know what, we may not have all the money, but this is the problem we're trying to solve, and we're going to solve it one way or another because we're determined and we have dogged will to make it happen. And so I think we not only need connectors, but we need people who understand how to see resources and not only use them in a traditional form, but use those resources in ways that we had never thought before.
Thanks, Ruben. Does anyone have any other final comments that they wanted to add?
I love that point that Ruben just made. I just got it.
Yeah. You just have to say that.
That's very, very important. That's very true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I really wanted to thank the three of you for your insights on what I think is a super important topic. And I also want to thank everyone for joining us today and watching. Like I said earlier, this is one of 2 live hangouts that we're going to have leading up to the Humanitarian Innovation Jam in 2015. Our next live hangout is actually going to be on December 9th, so definitely stay in touch with us to be sure to catch that session. We'll be tweeting about it from UNHCR Innovation, and we'll also be tweeting about it from +SocialGood. And also to let you know that the conversation is not going to end with this hangout. If you want to get deeper into the conversation, we're going to be posting some follow-up questions on CrowdHall at this link. I think you should be seeing it on your screen. If not, we're going to tweet it out later as well, just so you can have that. And we really just want to hear from you. So join the CrowdHall, share with us your own insights and your own experience on what it really means to manage innovation or create a supportive ecosystem for innovation in humanitarian organizations. Just thanks for watching again, and we will see you on December 9th.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.